You know what I got tired of? Building a door, hanging it, feeling proud of the thing, and then watching it twist itself into a pretzel by the following spring. I cannot tell you how many times I went through that. I would pick good lumber. I would take my time, and 6 months later, the door would be sticking in the frame or showing daylight along one edge. It made me want to quit building doors altogether. Then I started looking into how the pioneers and early American settlers built their doors, the ones you still see hanging in farmhouses and meeting houses that are 150, sometimes 200 years old, flat as the day they were made. And I realized they knew something most of us have forgotten. Today, I am going to walk you through exactly how they built doors that never warp and why their method is still the smartest way to do it. Plus, stick around to the end because I have a bonus tip about how the pioneers seasoned their doorstock that I have never seen in a single modern woodworking book. Let me show you what I found. Frame and panel construction is one of the oldest and most reliable building methods in the history of woodworking. It was not designed to look fancy or impress anyone. It was designed to solve a problem that every woodworker still faces today: the simple fact that wood moves. Once you understand the thinking behind it, you will never look at a door the same way again. When the first European settlers started building permanent structures in North America, they were working in an environment that was genuinely hostile to woodworking. The humidity swings in places like New England, the Mid-Atlantic, and down through the Appalachian settlements were brutal. You could go from a damp, soggy spring to a bone-dry winter, heated by nothing but a fireplace, and that kind of swing will destroy a flat piece of wood in a matter of weeks. These settlers did not have engineered lumber or plywood cores or modern adhesives. What they had was hand tools, local timber, and knowledge passed down through generations of European joiners and housewrights. The craft they brought over was not primitive. It was deeply refined. Centuries of building in English, German, and Scandinavian traditions had already solved the problem of wood movement. The solution was not to fight it was to design around it. The guiding principle behind every pioneer door is this: the wood is going to move no matter what you do. Your job is to build a structure that lets it move without tearing itself apart. They did not try to stabilize the wood or seal it into submission. They built a rigid frame and then let the panel inside that frame float, completely free to expand and contract with the seasons. The fatal flaw in most modern slab doors, and even a lot of homemade solid doors, is that they restrain the wood. They glue boards edge to edge and essentially tell the wood to stop moving. But the wood does not listen. It pushes and pulls against those restraints until something gives. And what gives is the flatness of your door. The first thing I noticed when I studied these old doors is that the pioneers were incredibly deliberate about grain selection before they ever picked up a chisel. For the frame members, the stiles, and rails, they wanted quarter-sawn stock almost exclusively. If you look at the end grain of a quarter-sawn board, the growth rings run roughly perpendicular to the face. That orientation is critical because quarter-sawn wood moves very little across its width. A white oak board that is 5 inches wide and flat sawn might expand or shrink 1/8 of an inch across the seasons. That same board, quarter sawn, might move a 32nd of an inch or less. For a door frame that needs to stay dead straight, that difference is everything. They also preferred heartwood for exterior doors because of its natural resistance to moisture and decay, especially in white oak or American chestnut. I started applying this kind of grain reading to my own projects about 5 years ago, and the difference was immediate. You are not hoping the door stays flat. You are engineering it to stay flat before you make a single cut. Now let me walk you through the frame itself, because this is where the real genius lives. The frame of a traditional door is made up of two vertical stiles and at least two horizontal rails. On a typical exterior door, you would also have one or two intermediate rails, dividing the door into multiple panel openings. Every one of these joints was a mortise and tenon. The stiles receive the mortises, and the rails have tenons cut on their ends. The pioneers cut their mortises about 1.25 inches wide and 2 to 3 inches deep, depending on the stock thickness. The frame stock itself was usually 1.75 to 2 inches thick for an exterior door. Here is what matters most. The frame is a self-contained structure. The stiles and rails, once joined, form a rigid rectangle that resists racking and twisting on its own. The frame does the structural work. It carries the weight, it holds the hinges, it meets the jamb. The panels inside are not structural at all. They just fill the opening and keep out the wind. This separation of roles is the single most important idea in the entire method. The tenons were typically cut about 1/3 of the thickness of the stock. So, on a 2-inch thick rail, the tenon would be roughly 11/16 of an inch thick, centered on the stock. A well-cut mortise and tenon in white oak is stronger than the wood around it. By the way, if you are enjoying learning about these old-world methods, I put together something I think you will really appreciate. It is called The Old Ways, and it is a collection of 100 forgotten woodworking secrets from traditional craftsmen around the world. Techniques like the ones we are covering today, and a whole lot more. You can grab your copy by scanning the QR code on screen, or just use the first link in the description. All right, let us keep going. This next part is what really changed how I think about building doors. Along the inside edges of every frame member, the pioneers plowed a groove. This groove typically ran 3/8 of an inch wide and 3/8 of an inch deep, centered on the edge of the stock. The door panel, whether a single wide board or 2 or 3 boards, edge joined together, was sized to fit into these grooves with room to spare. And here is the critical detail most people miss. The panel was never glued into the groove, never pinned, never fastened in any way. It simply sat in the groove, captured on all 4 edges, but free to slide as the wood expanded and contracted. In the summer, when humidity is high, the panel swells and pushes further into the grooves. In the winter, the panel shrinks and pulls back. But because the grooves give it somewhere to go, the panel never buckles, never cracks, and never pushes the frame out of square. The pioneers typically left about 1/4 inch of total expansion room. That 1/4 inch of breathing room is the entire reason these doors survive centuries. When I built my first true floating panel door, I remember being almost uncomfortable with how much the panel could move around during dry assembly. My instinct was to make it tighter, but I left it alone, and that door has been hanging in my shop entryway for 3 years without a single issue. The pioneers did not leave their panels as flat slabs with blunt edges. They raised them. A raised panel has a flat central field, surrounded by a beveled border that tapers to a thin tongue. That tongue fits into the groove. The bevel allows a thick panel, often 3/4 of an inch at the center, to have an edge thin enough to fit the groove without requiring a massive groove that would weaken the frame. The pioneers raised their panels with a dedicated panel-raising plane, a wide-bodied plane with a skewed iron set at about 10 degrees from flat. You work across the grain first on the top and bottom, then with the grain on the sides, to prevent blowout at the corners. If you do not own a panel raising plane, a sharp number 5 or number 6 bench plane works fine with the panel tilted in a vise. I have done it both ways, and the hand-planed bevel gives a slightly softer look that I actually prefer on rustic doors. Now here is the method that really sealed the deal for me. Instead of relying on clamps and glue to hold the frame joints tight, the pioneers used draw boring. You drill a 3/8 inch hole through the mortise in the stile, assemble the joint dry, mark where that hole meets the tenon, then pull the joint apart and drill the tenon hole about a 1/16 of an inch closer to the shoulder. When you drive a tapered hardwood pin through both holes, the offset forces the tenon to pull deeper into the mortise. The joint draws itself closed. No clamps, no glue. The mechanical lock is permanent and actually gets tighter over time. I was skeptical the first time I tried this. But when I drove that pin home and watched the shoulder pull flush with an audible snap, I was completely sold. This is why 200-year-old Pioneer doors still have joints tight enough to pass a feeler gauge test. The last thing the pioneers understood is that a door must be finished on every surface. Both faces, all 4 edges, and even inside the panel grooves. If you finish only the visible faces, moisture enters the unfinished side at a different rate, and that differential creates uneven stress that cups the door toward the unfinished side. The pioneers used linseed oil, tallow-based mixtures, and later milk paint to seal their doors completely. I use a couple coats of boiled linseed oil on every surface before final assembly, including the panel edges hidden inside the grooves, and then a top coat after hanging. This single habit eliminated about half the warping problems I used to have. Let me share some patterns I have noticed over the years, things I used to do myself that the pioneers handled completely differently. The first pattern is building doors from wide, flat-sawn boards, glued edge to edge. Most of us do this because it is fast and modern glue is strong. But every one of those boards is trying to cup, and when you restrain them with glue, the stress builds until the whole assembly twists. The pioneers avoided this by making the frame from narrow quarter-sawn stock and letting the panel float free. The second pattern is thinking thicker stock means a stiffer door. I used to believe that. But a 2-inch thick slab will warp just as badly as a 1-inch slab if the construction method is wrong. Thickness is not the answer. Construction method is. The third pattern is gluing the panel into the grooves because you are afraid of a rattle. I see this constantly. Someone builds a beautiful frame and panel door and then locks the panel in place. 6 months later, it cracks because it could not move. If the panel rattles in dry weather, that means it has room to expand in wet weather. That rattle is the sound of a door that works. The fourth pattern is skipping the finish on the backside. I did this for years, but the pioneers understood that every surface matters. An unfinished back creates a moisture imbalance that no amount of good joinery can overcome. Now for that bonus tip I promised. This is something I came across in a journal from a colonial-era joiner in Pennsylvania. Before building a door, the pioneers would stand their rough-sawn lumber inside the building where the door was going to hang, leaning the boards against the wall with spacer sticks between them, and leave it there for 2 to 3 weeks minimum. They were not just air drying. They were letting the wood reach equilibrium with the specific humidity of that building. When the door was built and hung, the panel was already at its baseline dimension for that environment. Any future movement would be minor seasonal variation rather than a dramatic initial shift. I started doing this with every door project, and the difference is remarkable. My panels seat perfectly in their grooves from day one, with just enough room for seasonal expansion. It takes patience, but it is the kind of quiet, practical wisdom the pioneers lived by. Before we wrap up, if today's video taught you something new, imagine having 100 techniques like this at your fingertips. That is exactly what the old ways is. It is my collection of forgotten woodworking secrets from the world's greatest traditional craftsmen, all in one place, with 75 photos and clear instructions. You can get your copy by scanning the QR code on screen or using the link in the description. Thanks for being here. Subscribe if you have not yet, and I will see you next time. Now go build a door your grandkids will still be using.